to where you can see yourself on screen. So when it says we're live, that means that people are watching us, Seth. So,
Okay.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Seth and I will get this adjusted. I'll give Seth a little more camera here. I try to have the guest on, and if somebody gets cut out, it's me. So, good morning, everyone. We are starting early today, and we are from a not a first time here. This is maybe the third time we've been live from our Roanoke research site. And Seth Tolley is here with me as my guest this morning. We'll get to know Seth as we go along. Let him introduce himself. And Heather might be watching from her home office. I'm not sure. She helped me get this set up, and usually she's watching to make sure that everything is going correctly and giving me a thumbs up when she can't be here in person. But Seth and I are going to give it a go here this morning. We are at Roanoke, which is one of our what do we call these sites now, Seth?
Agronomy hub, I suppose.
Okay, all right. So we can't leave well enough alone. We've gone through several reorgs in the recent time, and Seth's got a new role, and he's part of a new organization, and things are always, seemingly always in a state of flux here at Bayer. And Monsanto was the same. It's not a Bayer thing. That's just kind of an industry thing, I guess. But anyway, we'll kind of learn what Seth does and how he interacts with my squad and our dealers and our customers and all that sort of stuff as we get along here. But Seth and I are at Roanoke today because we are going to package up several hundred little packets of seed that we use for our crown rot trials that we started. I think this is the third year. I think we've done these, and so we get a group of people to come here today to Roanoke and help with that process. And we basically put a plot in a box, and each box is going to have 48 packets of seed, 48 different hybrids, and these will go on our crown rot screening trials. One row of each hybrid for 250 to 1,000 feet of road, depending on the location. We're going to send people with enough seed to do 1,000 feet plus. You put one row or one packet in each row of the planter. And if you're working with a farmer, which we work with farmers on a lot of these, a lot of 12 and 24 row planters out there. And so if you've got a 24 row planter, you put in 24 hybrids, drive down, clean out, turn around, put in the other 24, drive back, plot's done. Farmer's happy, he can go on with his business. These are not yield trials, obviously. You wouldn't want to make a yield trial out of a one row plot, but these are we're going to take other observations in these. So we look for ghosted plants. We do stalk quality assessments. I look at stay green, just overall plant health, and usually you can get some other, you might see tar spot differences, you might see other disease differences, and we try to note those if we see them. But the primary goal of these trials is to get a horrific infection of crown rot and then separate the differences between products. And as I said, we've done these for, I think this will be our third year. And the results have really been very helpful to us as we try to characterize our products for tolerance to crown rot, which is, certainly seems to be a worsening problem. It's not, none of it's new. None of the pathogens are new. The disease itself, the disease complex, there's lots of, it's an oversimplification to call it crown rot because there's many different pathogens involved in it. And, most of our diseases we talk about, there's one causal agent with crown rot. I don't know that we even know how many different pathogens there are that cause crown rot. And we're funding some research at universities to dig a little deeper. There's kids getting PhDs on our funding, Seth, for trying to figure out crown rot. So helping some young folks get educations and also learn about the different pathogens involved. And it's kind of generically called Fusarium crown rot, which I don't like the name because there's pathogens that aren't even Fusarium that are involved in crown rot. So it's kind of a complex of diseases. And if you send, and we do a lot of this too, if you send a crown rot infected root mass into a pathology lab, you're going to get a long list of things that they find in that root mass. And those assays identify what's there. They can't identify what was there first or what was there worst or what did most of the damage. But, we'll typically find anthracnose, we'll typically find pythium, we'll find fusarium. There's another pathogen called red root rot, which I technically think isn't really even considered crown rot. It's its own thing, but to me, it's just like crown rot, only worse. So I kind of lump it in with crown rot myself. And these assays that we're doing are not necessarily looking at that level. We're just looking at the end result. We're looking at what the farmer cares about, which is, did the plant die early? What kind of shape's it in at harvest? Is it something that's going to scare me to death that it looks like it's going to fall over yesterday and need harvested early? Is it going to die prematurely? That's where most of our yield loss from crown rot comes from, is that premature death that happens when you get those ghosted plants that ghost 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe even a month before black layer. And when that plant is not making it all the way to black layer, there is a tremendous amount of kernel weight lost. You have very shallow kernels, very, you'll oftentimes have low test weight as well, but the kernel weight is really what's driving the yield reduction. And Seth has been involved with us in those trials, but that's why we're here at Roanoke today. And we're starting early so that we can hop off of here, get on a conference call at 8, I think. Right. And then at 9, the plot packet, the seed packaging party begins, and we'll be here until that's all taken care of. So anyway, that was a poor way to introduce Seth. So I'll introduce Seth Tolley. So a couple weeks ago, I was on with Josh Tooley, and there are some people here at Bayer that there's my son calling me, probably a disaster of some kind going on at home. I'll deal with that later. So there are some people. I actually think Heather might have spelled your name wrong on some stuff she sent out. Tooley and Tolley can get transposed pretty easily. I know Tolley, and I've known Tolley's for a long time, so I struggle with Tooley sometimes because it's too close to Tolley. Other people struggle with Tolley because it's too close to Tooley. So anyway, a little alliteration for you there here this morning on Ask the Agronomist. But anyway, Seth grew up not far from where I'm from. I know his dad extremely well. His dad did plots for me back in the day. He's got 2 brothers, right? So three boys, yep. No girls in the family, right? Yeah. Your mom's probably going to enjoy granddaughters. Maybe she didn't get to raise any girls.
She's got a couple.
Yeah, awesome. So anyway, so I'll let Seth talk about his heritage and his education and what brought him to Bayer and what you do at Bayer, because you've got a new role that I'm excited about. So let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Lance. Yeah, so my name is Seth Tolley. I've been with Bayer for 3 years now. I have been a technology development representative, and just recently, over the past couple of months, they've transitioned some of us TDRs into PASs, so product agronomy specialists,
as opposed to a POS. Don't want to be that.
I've asked Lance not to comment.
I was almost at one point in my career an agronomic system specialist. And I thought that would be perfect to introduce myself as the ass from Monsanto, but they changed it to an agronomic systems manager once they realized the acronym spelled a naughty word.
I think somebody should have caught that probably sooner than it got to you. Yeah. Yes, I'll get into my PAS role here in a second. I grew up in Avon, Illinois. As Lance said, he was our DeKalb agronomist since, no offense, Lance, since as long as I can remember.
Well, how old are you, Seth?
I'm 30.
Okay. Well, I've worked here 33 years. So it is actually true that I maybe have been working for Seth's family since before he was born. It's depressing.
Yeah. Yeah. So like Lance said, I have 2 older brothers. My oldest brother is back farming with my dad. So that's kind of made it so my middle brother and I have been able to take jobs off farm. My parents, we have corn, soybeans, and then we raise cattle as well. So it's been an interesting upraising. Kind of no surprise that we kind of got into agriculture in general.
Yep. Yeah, it's a super nice family. For those who don't know the Tolleys, you should. They're great people, and it's nice that Seth was able to join on here at Bear. And his dad was super excited when he got hired. His dad thought it was, he seemed to think it was a little bit cool that Seth was going to get to work with me, and I had to explain to him there's really nothing cool about that. And Seth wasn't going to work with me, maybe quite as closely as his dad thought at first. But did you tell your dad you were going to be on here? By the way, I meant to send him a heads up and let him know about this.
I should have.
Yeah, no, shame on you. He can watch the recording, I guess. So
yeah.
I don't know if your dad ever watches Ask the Agronomist or not, but speaking of people watching Ask the Agronomist, feel free to chat in your questions. Always love answering your questions. And we've got Seth here, who has a educational background in plant breeding. Is that right?
Yep.
From Purdue.
Yep. So I was going to high school at Avon. I was the last graduating class there, so that's kind of a fun factor.
Yeah. What about 12, 15 in your class?
We had a big number of 16.
Yeah.
Yep. Made the trip over to Champaign then, and I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois. Did some work under Dr. Deers in the soybean lab over there. Had a good experience with him. I went to Purdue then, traveled a little bit further east for a master's degree and a PhD. For my PhD I was doing corn breeding and genetics within the agronomy department over there. Had a good experience, learned a lot. We can talk more about the work I did over there if that's relevant.
Yeah, sure.
So my project was on how we can incorporate technologies into breeding programs, more or less. Whether that be taking pictures of ears of corn to kind of analyze some of those secondary attributes that could be helpful in characterizing yields, how we can incorporate that with genomic prediction within breeding programs to improve our prediction accuracy of yield itself, and then kind of getting further into the weeds on testing characteristics, thinking about whether you should be growing all of the hybrids in a given breeding program all at the same field, whether you should have more of a sparse testing network where you're not evaluating all your hybrids at the same field, but evaluating at more locations. So trying to dig into that a little bit, and then how we can incorporate both phenotyping technologies with genomics, with environmental data in order to make your best prediction of yield, which is all things that Bear is doing and doing very well right now.
Right. Well, and it's kind of ironic as we, when we get into talking about your new role. When we hired you, I was, tickled that we hired you, but I thought, as a TDR, you're not going to get to use a lot of your skill set from college. And in this new role you've got, it actually is a little more, relevant, I think, to some of your skill set that you learned there at Purdue. So it's I think it's always nice when so many people go get a college degree and then end up doing something that has nothing to do with what they went to college for. Seth and I are actually working in an area that's pretty close to what we went to college for. So I made a similar transition when I was a student. I went from Big Valley High School, which graduating class of 42. So that was way bigger than your class there in Avon. But that is a bit of a transition to go from class of 16 Avon High School to U of I, and there's more people in one classroom than there are in the towns that we grew up near, Seth. So I didn't find that transition to be near as alarming as a lot of people thought it would be, but people do talk about that kind of stuff. So yeah. So anyway, you're transitioning from TDR role. So there's been a lot of transitioning around here. The TDR organization has kind of been merged with one group and split off with another group, and certain things are being done by our North American Field Testing Organization, which is the group that really runs all the breeding trials and all that stuff. So they are set up. They are professional plot, establishers and harvestors and data generators. And so a lot of the plot work that Seth would have been doing as a TDR within our old TD group has been transitioned over to the same group that runs our breeding trials. And we've got people in the field still that are, kind of in like Seth's old role that are doing plots like here at Roanoke. A lot of those folks tend to be more on the chemistry side of the business and the organization today. And then we've created this new role, the product agronomy specialist, right?
That's right.
Which tell us what that person does. I'm very excited about this role. I think it's going to be a great thing to have somebody with Seth's knowledge and background, whose job, and we've always kind of done this, but when I say we kind of did it, it was kind of a side gig for a TDR to a couple months out of the year spend some time out looking at corn and soybeans.
That's right.
Now the big advantage of what we're doing here with Seth's new role is that's a dedicated role, and he is dedicated to corn. You have a colleague that is dedicated to soy.
That's right. Ben Altoff.
Yeah. So and Ben's he's in Missouri.
Yep.
Right.
Just right across the state line.
Yep.
Hannibal,
Yep. And so you're covering Illinois.
I cover Central Illinois even.
Okay.
Specifically.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So that's cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, tell us what you think you're going to be doing in your new role.
Yeah. So I feel like the biggest thing that we'll be doing as a product agronomy specialist is product characterization. Previously,
which let's define that a little bit. I would define product characterization as figuring out what a product's strengths and weaknesses are and where they fit and how they should be managed and where they should be placed.
Yep.
Is that accurate?
That's exactly how I look at it. Yep.
Okay.
Thinking about, like Lance said, strengths, weaknesses. This is already something that we do, and I feel like we do really well in our MD phase of testing. Lance has a ton of plots. We have our crown rot trials that we're going to be packaging up here today.
Yeah, that's all part of product characterization.
It's all part of it.
We realized a few years ago that we needed to understand better, which hybrids are super susceptible to crown rot long before you find out about it in your cornfield, which is kind of the way it was happening prior to us doing some of these characterization trials. And I'm very proud of our breeding group. They have also figured out how to do some characterization within their trials. The challenge that breeding has is they don't like to plant corn stupid early, and planting corn stupid early is the best way to get a crown rot infection, and not putting fungicide on it is another good way to not get a crown rot infection. So when you're doing a breeding trial and you want good stand establishment and you want a little bit less stress and emergence time, that's not a good environment to induce a crown rot infection. So they have a few sites every year that get planted early enough and go through the right kind of spring conditions to get crown rot, and they've realized that at those locations that have a good infection, they need to characterize there. But you cannot characterize a problem at a location that doesn't have the problem.
That's right.
And so that's been some good learning for the breeding organization, and why in Seth's former role as a TD rep and in my role as an agronomist, we try to seek out environments that have a problem and look at or characterize those products in that environment.
Yeah. So the goal of our new role then is, rather than us learning a bunch of stuff in our MD year of testing, we have tons of years of testing before then. Mm-hmm. The goal is to bring a large data set to Lance, to our agronomist team in general, to say, this is where this product is really going to excel at. This is maybe the things that we need to watch out for. These are the management recommendations that maybe we either know, or the management recommendations that we need to learn. So that way, when we bring a new DeKalb hybrid out, it has the best chance to succeed on the grower's field that we place it on.
I mean, we've always relied a lot on yield data to tell that story. And that's, I mean, that at the end of the day, that's what you care about as a customer is the yield. But there are other things that you care about almost as much as that. And when something doesn't yield up to par, it's nice to know why. And if you just look at the data and you don't look at the plot, you don't know why. You might be able to speculate why, But I think what Seth's role to me is going to help us with is hopefully understand the why a little bit better, because it's the why that helps us figure out, where a product should be placed and where a product should not be placed, and how a product should be managed. And you gotta pay really close attention to detail about what's going on at each site. What's the weather been? What was the planting date? How was it managed? What's the soil environment? What's the fertility? What is it about that site that made product A awesome and product B disappointing?
Yep.
And if we can learn that, we can apply that knowledge to how we position those hybrids. And I was talking with our former colleague Chris Cowlaw the other day, and he has customers that ask him specifically, they accept the fact that a lot of more modern corn hybrids are pretty broadly adapted, and we pick them for that.
Yep.
And we're not picking a bunch of stuff that has to be treated completely differently than anything else. But their opinion is there are bad places to put every hybrid.
Yep.
And that's what they always ask Chris is, well, tell me where not to plant it. I get there's a better spot to put it, but I'm not really concerned as much about gaining 5 or 10 bushel as I am about losing 50 if I put it in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
So tell me where not to plant this hybrid, and that I'll be good.
That's right.
And so those are some of the things that hopefully Seth's work and the time that he's going to, because he's dedicated to, you'll be on the road a lot, looking at products in a lot of different environments.
Mm-hmm.
You're maybe not going to be traveling across states because you've got other colleagues. So how many of you are there nationwide? Do you know?
Yeah, so there are 13 PASs on the corn side. Anyways, I'm not exactly sure on the soy side, but
probably less.
Just like a little less.
We always short shift soybeans a little bit. When Rachel Willis was, so we used to have what do they call them? Field advancement specialists, FASs.
FAS, yep.
And so when Rachel was a TDR, she had a side gig of being an FAS. Randy McElroy had a side gig of being an FAS. Dave Shennett had a side gig of being an FAS. So a lot of our TDRs back in the day would have this field advancement specialist. I guess I'll call it a role,
volunteer opportunity.
You didn't get paid for it. It was just kind of, when you have time, you need to do this too.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that is really nice about Seth's role is it's a dedicated role. He can focus on that. He's going to do some other stuff too, kind of on this. He'll do some plot work on the side. He's helping us with crown rot because that's all related to what he's doing. And certain times of year when there's not corn to look at in the field, he can be helpful to us on other aspects of research and evaluating things as well. So he's still very very engaged in kind of his old role as well, helping us determine what sort of testing we should be doing. And who's going to do that testing? Because these guys, when he was a TD rep, they've got planters, they've got combines, they've got equipment, they've got sites. So our Warrensburg site that I mentioned before, the site here at Roanoke, I hear we're trying to establish a new site around Princeton, I think.
Yep.
We've got other sites scattered around the state. Not all of them quite as nice and fancy as Roanoke and Warrensburg, but we do have places where we have relationships with farmers where we rent some acres off of them and do our testing, to kind of supplement. We've obviously got our big research farms like Monmouth and Jerseyville, but you need to. Seth made this point earlier. You need lots of locations. You can't. If you do all of your testing in one environment, you're only characterizing that one environment. And as you farmers know, every field can be different. Every square foot of every field can be different. Every year is different. Every farmer's different. There are things that you might not think of that really dramatically change the environment that a plant experiences, and planting date is one of those, especially with ground rot. If you wait till, May 5th is usually the date that I use. If you wait till May 5th or after to plant corn, I don't think you'll have ground rot. But, this is central Illinois. We've had people planting beans for a week now, Seth. You guys got some beans in yesterday, I think. So that's, hats off to our researchers that, back not that long ago, I'd say maybe 5 years, as recently as 5 years ago, we'd ask these guys to do a planting date study, and the first planting date would be like, May 5th. And they have really, really upped their game. So Seth, I was looking at some of Seth's data from last year recently, because he had this trial last year. I think he had 2 planting dates in March.
Yep.
And then he had maybe 2 or 3 in April, a couple in May, and a couple in June. I think it was 2, 2, and 2.
Yeah.
So you had 8 planting dates, which, that's more than we asked for. You got to have more than 2. Because Seth's the statistician here, not me. But you can't really establish a trend with 2 dates, because that's just going to be a straight line, and you're going to assume. All right, Merle Bedell. Good morning, Merle. Seth's role being heavy data gathering and data analysis. Are there AI tools available that can help the agronomists and retailers improve their hybrid recommendations? Wow.
Yeah,
that's the kind of question Bear would like. Merle, I'm not a big AI guy. Seth's probably more open to the idea than I am. I think of a little movie I used to enjoy called Terminator when I think of AI technology. So Bear has invested heavily in AI, and we are forging ahead there, because we don't want to be left behind in that space as agriculture goes there too. So AI could be, an automated tractor. It could be a robot doing something in a field. It could be, maybe a drone taking some sort of imagery. We use a lot of AI for data analysis. So I'll let Seth chime in on that. But yeah, there's going to be, I think, I'll go out on a limb and say, the potential for over reliance on AI, because I want Seth's, eyes looking at stuff. I don't want to rely on computer models for everything. And I think there are people that think you can rely on computer models for everything. And I think boots on the ground and having a live human actually in the field looking at products is really what we need to complement the technology that's out there. Yep. But we have developed a tool internally, which is kind of our agronomic version of ChatGPT, where we can ask it a question, or it can help us share information. All those tools need to be used, and they need to learn, and they need to be taught. And that's a little bit the challenge with our tool is, it's not going to get millions and millions of people using it like the external tools do, like the ones your kids are using to do their homework for them. There's a lot of people in those tools, and they just get a lot more information put into them. But we have invested in a tool we call Eli, which I can't remember what that stands for.
I don't know what it stands for.
There's an acronym there. But yeah, we are, I'm a, Merle, you know me pretty well. This might not surprise you. I'm a bit of a stick in the mud when it comes to embracing, these sorts of tools. I've been asked to do that. I get asked to do a lot of things. Sometimes I do what I'm asked to do, but I have not been the biggest embracer of AI technology. That might be something Seth is, as we already established, he's a lot younger than me. So he probably thinks that's a better thing than I do. So I'll shut up and let the young smart guy talk about AI a little bit.
No, I mean, I completely agree with what Lance said, actually. I don't think that AI can ever replace boots in the ground relationships, people giving strong advice. It feels like, we have had a surge in AI across the globe, but within the agriculture space as well. So, but along with that, especially at Bayer, we've invested also in people, boots on the ground too, with regards to some of the sales agronomist roles that have been opening up as well, which I think could add some really interesting opportunities for how Bayer relates to farmers. In terms of AI, though, yeah, like Lance said, we're using different technologies in terms of drones, imaging capacities, in order to evaluate different characteristics of the plant, whether that be the ears, the stalks, the tassels, the roots. All of those things are being used. We have large data sets that are being built, that are generated across the United States for our hybrids that we're evaluating. And, really what AI is, it's just trying to make quick work of summarizing data. Our brains are really good at doing that pretty quickly too. AI can sometimes pick up on trends that we have a hard time picking up on ourselves. And a part of my role as a product agronomy specialist, a part of Lance's role as an agronomist is training these AI models a little bit, trying to see, is there things that the model is doing really well at being able to help us or our customers with recommendations on, and are there things that it's just not doing well at this point that needs severe improvement?
And I think that the ability of AI technology to identify patterns and trends, when you've got a data set that would choke a horse, and you need to analyze that every which way. AI can do that a lot faster than Seth and I can, and maybe it identifies something that Seth and I want to drill into or pay closer attention to, or look at it in the field. I know our breeding group uses something they call digital twin, which is I would call that AI of sorts. It's it's an algorithm that essentially predicts the performance of hybrids in different environments, and then we can test in those environments and see how close that predictive tool. So some of our breeding today is kind of done on a computer to fine tune what we do in the field. And we think that's going to help us. In the old days, you had to make a cross, get the seed from that, and then plant it and see what happened. And there's still an element of that in product testing. That's never going to go away. But we can eliminate a lot of things that aren't worth testing, and try to concentrate. So let's say you've got 1,000 slots for new products. And in the old days, maybe 10 of those were truly worth testing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to test maybe 750 out of the 1,000 are potential blockbuster products. And then you can make genetic gain faster, and you can find more cool stuff more routinely because you're improving your odds, because you've eliminated a lot of the crap, the stuff that was going to turn out to be poor enough that you're like, well, we didn't even need to plant that, but we already did.
That's right.
The idea of some of the technology is, can we identify the ones that aren't worth planting before we plant them? And that frees up more spaces for things that are potentially exciting. So that's kind of the holy grail, so to speak, of plant breeding, is to test only the good stuff and eliminate a lot of the chaff from the wheat, so to speak, but before you go to the expense, because we have a limited, finite amount of resources to physically test products. We can only test so many products. We can only test at so many locations. And so you want to be testing the very best stuff you can test. And that's what some of these, modern breeding technologies enable us to do. And then we're headed towards, gene editing and other things like that will give us, the ability to do things that, we've never been able to do before. And so there's a lot of excitement and a lot of potential for a lot of this technology to, really drive advancements in performance. And, there used to be, I would say when I started my career, there absolutely was a trade-off between yield and plant health.
Yeah.
And I think there still is. I think we've made a lot of headways there, but what if there wasn't? What if you could have a plant that was immune to 8 different really important corn diseases that had just as much top end yield potential as the one that was susceptible to everything, that you were always on, eggshells with, oh, it's going to be great unless this happens. And with some of this technology, you can probably break some of those linkages that have, maybe pushed people who were selecting just on yield, because if you select just on yield, you're going to lose lots of other stuff.
Yep.
And so it's easy to select for one thing. The breeders have always told me, hey, if you want a hybrid that's great for plant health, that's easy.
Yeah.
If you want a hybrid that yields a lot, that's easy. Getting both in one hybrid with good roots and good stalks, and that's not 14 feet tall and has drought tolerance and has everything else you're looking for, that's where it gets really difficult. And so these technologies and tools can I think help stack the deck.
Yeah.
and get more good stuff in our field trials, and for Seth to look at and for me to get to look at the year after Seth looks at it.
Yeah. And I agree with what you said too. Like, at the end of the day, breeding is a numbers game, and however we can improve our odds and have in testing the best stuff, it's going to put us in a better spot and bringing out better products to customers.
Yeah, because it's and we've already, we can demonstrate we have improved our odds of success, over the old days already, just with, we've got marker technology. We have the seed chipper. We test every seed before we plant it, and if it doesn't contain what we're looking for, we don't plant it. It goes in the reject pile. And back in the early days of biotech, you take a hole puncher out and take a leaf disc, and after the plant was already planted and up so big, you would test it and see, okay, does it have the right stuff in it that we're looking for? If it didn't, you saved yourself the trouble of taking it to yield, but you already went to the trouble of planting it, and it was taking up a spot that you would have rather had something else in, but you didn't know that when you planted. Now we know that when we plant, because of the seed chipper technology and other technologies. So yeah, breeding is, if you got kids at home that want to be a scientist, modern corn breeding is, being a corn breeder has always been pretty scientific, but there's always been a lot of art to it as well. And I don't think that's ever going away, but the amount of art has probably decreased and the amount of science has increased. And there is a lot of really cool stuff going on. We call our breeding program now, we go through these different generations. We refer to what we call precision breeding, which is kind of, in the past, we've been trying to select for the best products. We think we're on the cusp of being able to design the best products, and then with feedback from customers of what we need. I've got a really good customer of ours that he likes to tease me that we're spending money making the wrong crop short, because he's convinced that soybean lodging is a bigger issue on their operation than lodging in corn. And he wants some beans that aren't so darn tall. And so really, when you can control things and do things in the genome, and these genes control this and these genes control that, and with gene editing technology and the markers and all the precision breeding stuff, you can, you could start to build shorter soybeans if that is, a goal that we have. And I do sort of agree. All the vegetative growth we get on soybeans and our high management soybean systems is not helping anything from a yield perspective, because there's not a lot of correlation between the amount of biomass a soybean makes and the amount of yield a soybean makes. And if we could train them to focus more on the reproductive parts of the plant and less on the vegetative parts of the plant, I think we could increase the yield of soybeans and make them easier to harvest at the same time. So, there's lots of lots of potential in all these areas, and that's the kind of stuff on the corn side that Seth's going to be able to dig into in his role, and hopefully his knowledge that gets passed on to me, that gets passed on to our sellers and our dealers and our growers, enables us to make better recommendations for you, which gets you better performance from our products, and everybody's happier when that happens.
That's right.
Yeah. So you're covering. So what is Central Illinois?
Yeah.
To you,
I would consider it 80 to 70.
Okay.
Is what I'm covering.
Yep. I think that's good. There's
Yep.
Illinois, and I found most states are weird in the same way. It depends on where you're from in a state, where the north stops and the central starts, and then it goes south. I mean, growing up where I did, I thought Springfield was Southern Illinois. I now realize Springfield's actually right in the middle. There's nothing Southern about Springfield. And that's extremely offensive to you 618ers out there that are the real Southern Illinois. And I went to college with people from that big city up in northeastern Illinois that thought anything south of I-80 was Southern Illinois.
Right.
And I always knew that was wrong. But I didn't realize, that for a long time I was equally wrong when I thought Springfield was Southern Illinois. So I've learned a lot of states kind of have that, they're geographically challenged that way, and what's south and what's north depends a lot on where you grew up in the state, it seems.
Yeah, and I mean these are arbitrary lines, so that doesn't mean I'm not going to walk plots that are north of I-80. We have 105, 110 testing that's up there. So if it's relevant to material that we're going to be planting in Central Illinois, then it's still relevant to be walking that material.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned maturity. That's something that we've realized, again, looking at data, that farmers have radically changed in the last 10 years. The maturity of what they're growing. Corn has moved way later. Beans have actually moved earlier. So the two crops are kind of going in two different directions. And we have changed our testing. And I think the call we're getting on at 8:00 is related to that in some way. So that's, we try to keep up with, what farmers are doing. I mean, 6835 is a huge hybrid for DeKalb that's being grown. There's probably somebody in Wisconsin that's planting a little bit of 6835. And 10 years ago, there would have been nobody in Wisconsin planting 118-day corn. And we're essentially growing a lot of the same hybrids in Illinois that they grow in the South now, which is related to some of the supply challenges we've had this year because the South planted our corn. But the 115 RM, which if you've ever seen the RM zones, there's these relative maturity zones that most of you don't pay much attention to. There, if you're a gardener or a nursery person, there's the winter hardiness zones where you can plant different plants. The relative maturity zones look a lot like those. And I think what we call the 115 RM has moved, I think, 100 miles. That's what they say.
Especially in Illinois.
Yeah. And in Illinois, the 115 RM has moved 100 miles north. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the weather has moved 100 miles north, but the farming practices, as far as what maturity you're planting, have moved 100 miles north. And we have had a rash of years here in recent years where we've had a really hot, dry end to the summer, and that's driving that. And I've got farmers that if I could sell them 120 plus day corn that had really good late season plant health, that would not fall apart, that would be intact and pretty and maybe even a little bit green still when they get to it in early November to finish up harvest, that would be a very welcome thing, because harvest for a lot of, especially our larger producers, is a several week process, and something's got to be last. And that product that's going to be last, it's probably going to be really dead and really dry and maybe falling apart. And so you need something that is really full season with really good plant health, so that you're finishing your harvest on something that doesn't look like a disaster. And, that's probably not going to be 112-day corn. That's probably going to be a 118 or later hybrid, and not all full season hybrids even fit that. 6835 is a great example. It's a hell of a hybrid, but it's not a great leave it to last hybrid, because you got to have not just the maturity, but also, the agronomic characteristics to go with that. That's something that Seth's been involved in. It's that they call leave out trials, which, in the breeding world, it's fast, too fast, some of you would say, but we got to get those plots out, get that data crunched, get that data analyzed. We don't do commercial production in the winter, but we do a lot of, breeding seed increases and a lot of parent seed increases and a lot of inbred seed increases in the winter. And so it's really, really regimented. You got to get the plots harvested. You got to get the data analyzed. You go to this nursery, you get that harvested, then you go back, in spring and in the northern hemisphere, and you can't necessarily leave a lot of plots in the field until the middle of November to, because I think their deadline for data is earlier than that.
Yeah.
So we've started doing some what we call leave out trials, where we have some trials that are planted just for the purpose of not harvesting them timely, so that we will see what you will see when the reality is you can't harvest 5,000 acres timely. So something's got to wait. And, in a lot of cases, prior to doing some of these trials, we didn't exactly know what some of these hybrids were going to look like when they got planted, April 1st in central Illinois, and then didn't get harvested until the 5th of November, because that's not how we test them. We don't plant that early, and we harvest a lot of corn at 25% moisture because we need the data.
Yeah. That is something I'm really excited about this year. So last year we had a leave out trial at Warrensburg within our P4 data. It was a pretty big success, really helpful within our deployments, looking at late season notes in terms of intactness, stay green, crown rot late season. We're able to, it's leave out to the third week of October.
Yeah.
Which is like, it'd be nice if we could leave it out longer.
That's what that was my feedback when we did the first of these a couple of years ago. Is like, you didn't leave them out long enough, but it was better. So baby steps. So to define what P4 means, P4 would be the fourth year of testing of an experimental hybrid or field testing of that hybrid. That would be the advancement year. So they would go from P4, which is the last year in breeding. They would get, if they make the cut, they get a hybrid name, and then the following year would be the first year they're in market development trials. And so I don't spend a lot of time looking at, stuff that's still in breeding, because I got my hands full with the stuff that we're already selling or the new products. But Seth will spend a lot of time in that P4 class and maybe some time in P3 as well.
So, yeah.
And so he's going to know what's coming. And then when we go to our advancement meeting in December, early December, every year, and learn about the new hybrids, Seth and the other PASs will be there with us, and they will, have been the people that have been intimately looking at these products all through the summer, along with our breeders. But the breeders have their hands full doing other stuff as well. So I see Seth's role as a really nice intermediary between the breeding and the agronomy organization, and he can help the breeders characterize products. He's not a breeder, so he doesn't necessarily have favorites. I've experienced that. They say that you're not supposed to have favorites amongst your children, but all your children is kind of your favorites as compared to other people's children. And so I think occasionally maybe breeders can be a little biased on what they think of their children. And so Seth can help rein those guys in and say, well, let's your kid's not perfect. Let's look at this a little bit critically.
That is kind of a cool thing about the position. Like, we have a lot of people that walk our pre-commercial plots in Central Illinois, across the United States. One thing that's cool, like, different people are looking at things for different reasons.
Right.
What's really nice about the position that we're moving into now is my reason for walking the plots is trying to evaluate what's going to be the best fit for Central Illinois.
Right.
And so we've already had a seat at the table in terms of advancements, what's getting deployed to Lance and to growers. While we've been FASs, we're just having more time now to be able to focus on bringing out those products, giving the reasons why this product is going to be the fit for Illinois, whereas maybe one of the other new deploys is a better fit for Nebraska.
Right. And I think you can also help us, how aggressive do we get with new products? When do we make it's there's two things that are really difficult to decide in advance. And a lot of this stuff gets done in advance because when we, we've already, so all these new hybrids that got advanced last year. So things that you guys haven't even heard of yet. So DKC 11507, DKC 11387, DKC 11082, DKC 11015. Those are like the four big dogs of this year's new class for us as we see it today.
Really excited about them.
And so we have built a crop plan to sell you all four of those hybrids. And we did not build a crop plan to sell you 4 or 5 other hybrids that we didn't think were as adapted. We could have grown those to sell too, but we didn't, based off of what we thought we knew about them. And we always, occasionally, we won't say we always, but we occasionally miss something. So there's probably one of those or two of them that we passed on that might be great this year. And then we're going to be scrambling. Well, okay, do we jump on that bandwagon, or do we say no? That was just a year thing. It's 1 out of 3 years it's going to be that good. The other 2 out of 3 years you're going to be glad you didn't sell it. Well, that's what Seth can help us figure out. And likewise on the backside of a product's life cycle, at some point we got to retire. We can't keep bringing out new ones without retiring the old ones. And, we've got products that, are still popular with customers. And, as long as a product is popular with customers, we kind of try to hang on to it because we don't want to alienate our customers. But, at some point we gotta move on. And that's a tough decision. And if you're going to bring something new in, you kind of need to kick something out because we've already got, frankly, more hybrids than we would like to be managing. It might surprise some of you how many, I think I asked Josh this on when I had him on 2 weeks ago. I think it was 200 and something, 230-ish, I think. Now that's North America wide. So that goes from 75-day corn down to 122-day corn, and white corn, waxy corn, conventional corn, all the different trait platforms, and obviously the average grower, is going to plant 5 hybrids, maybe. I plant about 10 because I'm a corn nerd. But most of you don't plant 10 hybrids on your farm. If you do, thank you. I like that. I've always challenged my salesmen. I think 10 hybrids, 10% of each hybrid is a really nice mix, and you can't really go too wrong with that. But what we tend to do is we tend to try to find those 1 or 2 or 3 that we want to plant a lot of acres to, and it's just it's easier to manage fewer products, but it's riskier to have fewer products as well because nobody's ever made anything yet that didn't have a bad year eventually. And if the year a product decides to have a bad year is the year you planted 40% of your farm to it, that's a tough day for you and a tough day for us because it might have been your idea, but when it doesn't go well, then it was kind of my fault too because I let you have your idea. So if anybody else has a quick question, Seth and I are coming up on time here, and we got to hop on a call at 8:00. But thanks for joining us here on Ask the Agronomist this morning. And Seth, thanks for getting up early and traveling to Roanoke. So we got a busy day ahead of us here, and field conditions are, but I looked at the drought monitor the other day. I've got a lot of acres that are D2 and D3 drought here across central Illinois. And D2, D3 means perfect planting conditions. And, if we were in a arid climate, being that droughty would be awful. But, for us, when we're dry, I mean, people are telling me how great the soil's working. I don't think the soil's working great because of the winter. I think the soil's working great because we're in a drought and we're usually too wet. And when you work soil wet, you just set yourself up for all sorts of problems. But, we got guys that are knocking fields down, running vertical tillage tools, which I'm not a big fan of vertical tillage tools in the spring, unless it's really dry, which it is. We got people putting in anhydrous. We got guys planting soybeans. And if you're like my good friend Chris Carlisle, if you're driven by soil conditions, you're probably tempted to be planting. I'm not a big fan of March planting corn or soybeans. Just Seth's data from last year, it was interesting. I was a little bit dismayed how good your March beans were in your data last year, Seth.
It was flat.
Yeah, they were not better than the April beans. I like to make that point. So I think people think that earlier is better forever, and at some point, and I'm going to say that point is about April 20th, maybe 25th. Anything before that is the same or worse. So it doesn't get better, but your data last year was, your 2 planting dates in March were just as good as your planting dates in April. I still think something really bad is going to happen one of these years where we get a bunch of March beans in, they all get up, and then we get a freeze. And I've had some conversations with growers that you believe that we are holding back a bunch of extra seed just in case that happens. We are not. We don't grow 2x the amount of seed that we need. So if we smoke a couple million acres of soybeans one of these years with an early freeze, you're going to be planting what you can get your hands on to replant all those acres. And when that happens, that'll be awful, and we'll probably overreact to that. We overreact to stuff, but the beans that were planted in March last year were really good. Some of the best beans. And so every year we get a little braver, and one of these years we'll get caught in a bad spot. But soil conditions are really nice for if you've got spring field work to do, if you've got anhydrous to put on. If you want to do some spring tillage, the dust is rolling across central Illinois. We are definitely going to need timely rains as we go through the growing season, but a dry spring followed by timely rains, those tend to be our best crops.
Yep.
And wet spring is, Southern Illinois struggled through a wet spring, and Southern Illinois struggles through wet spring about 4 out of 5 years, it seems like. But last year was just awful, and you don't want to wish a wet spring on anybody. So I actually like a spring drought, but as that spring drought lingers into summer drought, that's when it turns out not to be a good thing. So anyway, we'll maybe have a little more of a planting update in 2 weeks. That sounds like we're going to get some moisture. I hope we do, frankly. Yep. And because some of you that want to plant your beans, we haven't been able to deliver them to you yet. So that's been a bit of a topic of conversation here in recent days. It's like, hey, I'm ready to go. Where's my seed? So sometimes the seed industry forgets how early you want to plant, and so we'll do our best with that. But a little moisture to cool people's jets a little bit would not be a bad thing in my opinion. So we'll see what the weather brings. Going to be 83 and potentially stormy here today. Hopefully we don't have any severe storms, but when it's mid 80s and humid in March, something exciting is going to happen somewhere probably. So Anyway, everybody stay safe. Seth, thanks for being on with us.
Yep,
and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. So take care.